Have you ever had that feeling of being watched even when you are completely alone? That invisible presence, a whisper that cuts through the silence of the night, or a shadow that passes too quickly to be explained? Today, you will dive into 3 accounts so terrifying that perhaps, just perhaps, your next night's sleep won't happen as you expect. And it all begins with an isolated place, a family secret, and something that should never have been unearthed. Story 1. The barren soil of Scarab Hill. They say some lands were not made to harbor life, but rather to hide death. In a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais, there was a hill surrounded by dense forest that the locals avoided at all costs. They called it Scarab Hill because of the infestation of black insects that mysteriously appeared every year between September and November. But what no one dared to say out loud is that during that time, someone also went missing. Rogerio, a 61-year-old retired agronomist, decided to move into his younger brother's house after his suspicious death. The property was right on the edge of Scarab Hill. As a skeptical man, used to dealing with the land and scientific explanations, Rogerio ignored the warnings from neighbors and the heavy silence that hung over the place. He wanted peace. That was all. In the first few days, everything seemed calm until Rogerio began to notice small holes in the ground of the yard, as if something was digging from the inside out. Thinking it was armadillos, he set up cameras to record what was happening at night. When reviewing the footage in the morning, something left him paralyzed. At 1:44 a.m., the ground began to move on its own, almost pulsating, as if it were breathing. Then, an extremely thin and greenish hand appeared, trying to emerge. Following that, the recording froze. Frightened, but still trying to stay rational, Rogerio decided to dig the spot during the day. He found a human skeleton with signs of torture, rusty chains still attached to the arms, and a broken jaw. When he informed the police, the response was strangely evasive. "This isn't the first time something like this has been found here," said the tired-eyed officer. That night, hell began. The house was invaded by a nauseating smell. The temperature dropped, and in the bathroom mirror, a phrase appeared written with something viscous. "You unearthed what wants to stay buried." Rogerio tried to leave, but the door was locked, from the inside, as if the house were alive. The lights flickered, and then he heard footsteps. 4, then 6, then 8. Something slowly climbed the stairs, scratching the walls with claws too long to be human. The next morning, the house was empty. No sign of Rogerio. Only the security camera recorded the last scene. Him being dragged down the stairs by something that never appeared in the video, only his footprints forming alone behind him. The police filed the case as a common disappearance, but the locals know. They always knew. The hill always wants more. Story 2. The elevator of the Ivory Building. In a capital city in southern Brazil, an old commercial building called Ivory is about to be demolished. The building has 12 floors and was abandoned after a series of inexplicable tragedies, all involving the same place, the elevator. Employees reported hearing cries coming from the shaft even when no one was inside. Other times, it moved on its own, always stopping at the 11th floor, where there were never any offices, only technical rooms. Until in 1994, a maintenance team found something that changed everything. Joaquim, an experienced 44-year-old technician, was called after the elevator got stuck with a lawyer inside. Upon arrival, he noticed that the electrical system had been turned off from inside the cabin, something impossible. The lawyer was rescued but was in shock, repeatedly murmuring, "She is waiting for me on the upper floor. She knows my name." That same day, he took his own life by jumping from the top of the building. This sparked Joaquim's curiosity. He returned to the building in the early hours of the morning with a colleague who was also a paranormal enthusiast. When they accessed the control room, they realized that the security cameras had been replaced with old VHS recordings. One showed the elevator opening on the 11th floor, where a pale woman in a torn white dress with hair stuck to her face entered and stood still. When the doors opened again on the ground floor, she had disappeared. The recording was from 1981. They decided to investigate personally. They walked up to the 11th floor because the elevator refused to go there. Upon opening the door, they found an incomplete floor, poorly lit, with cracked walls and scratch marks scattered around. The sound of low crying echoed through the corridors. Joachim's colleague advanced alone and never returned. Joachim ran down, but the stairs seemed endless. When he finally exited, 7 hours had passed, even though it felt like only 30 minutes to him. Today, the Ivory Building is monitored with 24-hour guards, but no one goes near the elevator. In the quietest nights, it still ascends on its own and stops on the 11th floor. Story 3. The Doll in the Cornfield. On the outskirts of a forgotten little town in Mato Grosso do Sul, there is a rural property known as the Farm of Voices. The reason? Throughout its years of existence, neighbors heard conversations coming from the cornfield, even when it was empty. But nothing was as frightening as the case involving little Lucia, an 8-year-old girl who disappeared in 2007 after telling her parents she had made a new friend. The girl spent her afternoons playing alone, but one day she returned with a doll made of dry corn husks and black glass eyes like coal. She said her name was Mina and that she lived in the cornfield. The doll was grotesque, almost alive. The parents thought it was just their daughter's imagination, but soon the nightmares began. Every night they heard childish laughter coming from outside. And Lucia began to behave strangely. She whispered to the doll and once buried a live bird in the yard because Mina asked. On the night of her disappearance, the mother woke up to the sound of clapping. She ran out and found the door. Open, tiny footprints leading into the middle of the cornfield. The searches lasted for days without success. Only weeks later did they find a clearing in the middle of the plantation, with dozens of handmade dolls hanging from branches like a ritual. In the center, a circle of stones with the name Lucia written in dried blood. The original doll, Mina, was never found. And to this day, every year, a new doll appears on the property's fence, always made with dry corn husks and glass eyes. Story 4. The Feast of Mansion 74. It was the end of December when a family decided to rent an old colonial mansion in the interior of Espírito Santo to spend Christmas away from the city. The place, although preserved, had a bad reputation among the locals. They said it was the Mansion of Promises, where over 100 years ago, a cult held ritualistic dinners with its members, and with those who mysteriously disappeared from the surroundings. Of course, tourists paid no attention to these legends. The family, consisting of Cicero, a retired librarian, his wife Clotilde, and their 2 teenage grandchildren, arrived at the location 2 days before Christmas. The mansion was beautiful, surrounded by fruit trees and an air of mystery. But at night, the windows would bang without wind, footsteps echoed on the floorboards above, and voices seemed to converse among themselves, always about the same topic: food. On Christmas Eve, while preparing the feast, Clotilde found a hidden door in the pantry, locked with an old chain. Determined to explore, the grandchildren broke the lock with a sledgehammer. What they saw inside made their blood run cold. A gigantic black wooden table, covered in cut marks, and a series of ceremonial plates with indecipherable symbols. On the walls, portraits of pale people, all with their eyes scratched out. That same night, at exactly midnight, the house closed itself. The windows were sealed with nails that hadn't been there before. The doors disappeared, and then the feast began, but not theirs. The table in the dining room, empty until then, was set with ancient banquets, still warm meats, moldy bread, and chalices of congealed wine. Seated at the table were figures dressed in period clothing, motionless, until one of them turned their head towards the family and said in a slow, dry voice, "The house needs new flavors." The next morning, a group of hikers found the mansion locked from the outside, but no sign of the family. In the center of the dining table, only 4 used utensils and a broken chain on the pantry floor. Story 5. The Bus at 12:52. On the outskirts of a city in northern Paraná, there is a legend about a bus that always passes at 12:52 a.m. The strange thing is that it has no number nor name on the sign, just a green glow on the dashboard and a driver who never says a word. Those who get on, they say, never come back. But every legend has a beginning, and this one started with Nilsson, a 32-year-old man who worked as a night delivery driver. Tired of the routine and nearing the end of his shift, Nilsson found himself stuck in a part of the city with scarce transportation. With no battery on his phone, he decided to wait for any bus. When the vehicle stopped, he didn't hesitate. He got on. There were no passengers. The internal lights were dim and pulsing, which made him feel slightly nauseous. The driver, in a pressed suit and face hidden by a cap and darkness, merely nodded. As the bus moved on, the landscape became strange. Buildings disappeared, streets changed shape, and then he realized he was passing through places that didn't exist. Wooden houses that looked painted with charcoal, twisted poles, and no other vehicles on the roads. He tried to pull the cord to get off, but nothing happened. The bus ignored the stops. The windows began to fog up from the inside, and words began to appear in the steam. "You have been chosen." Desperate, Nilsson went to the driver and shouted. When the man turned around, he revealed a face without eyes, just two black holes from which a kind of smoke flowed. Then the bus stopped abruptly. The doors opened to a corridor of hanging bodies, all upside down, swaying slowly. Nilsson woke up days later in the woods, dehydrated, with belt marks around his torso, as if he had been strapped to a chair. He never spoke again. He never rode a bus again. But at 12:52 a.m., he always looks out the window, because he knows one day the bus will return. Story 6. The Confessional of St. Raphael Parish. Lucas was a 29-year-old young man who had left his career as a tax auditor to dedicate himself to religious life after a devastating personal loss. He was sent to a small parish in the interior of Maragnon, where he was responsible for confessions and ceremonies. Soon after arriving, he was warned by other church members the old confessional was sealed and should never be used. "There are things in there that even God doesn't listen to," they said. Curious, Lucas decided to investigate. The confessional was a structure of dark wood, decorated with carvings that looked like closed eyes. Inside, a putrid smell permeated the air, even though it had been closed for years. One night, after Mass, he heard knocks coming from inside it. 3 knocks, always at 3:03 a.m. Then, a voice whispered, "Father, I have sinned against all advice." Lucas entered. He sat down. The curtain closed by itself, and then he began to listen. The voice was that of a child, but the words were rotten, full of hatred, speaking of tortures it supposedly committed for centuries. The account lasted 7 minutes. At the end, the voice said, "Now it's your turn." The door locked. Lucas felt small, sharp hands gripping his arms. The wood around him began to bleed. He tried to scream, but his voice wouldn't come out. He was found the next day, still locked inside. He was alive, but his eyes were completely white. Since then, he doesn't speak, doesn't eat, and spends his days scribbling symbols on the walls of his room, all identical to the carvings of the confessional. No one else enters that church, not even the priest, because now the demon confesses and listens. If you made it this far, it's because you're ready for more. But before moving on to the next block, answer me one thing. Which of these stories affected you the most? Tell me in the comments. You don't need to write a thesis. Just tell me which one truly gave you chills, or which one you swear you've heard something similar. Maybe it happened in your town, right? And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. But do it this way. Subscribe only if you enjoy this kind of horror that truly scares, without fluff and without censorship. Because here, we don't hold back. We deliver what no one else has the courage to tell. Story 7. The House of Closed Eyes. In the little town of Boa Esperança, a newlywed couple decided to start their life away from the noise of the capital. They bought an old house on top of a hill, which was for sale at a price below market value. The realtor simply said, "It has been empty for a long time, but it awaits new tenants." Right in the first few days, Elisa and Gustavo noticed something strange. All the windows of the house had heavy curtains, secured with wires, and no matter how hard they tried to open them, they always closed again by themselves at night. But what bothered them the most was the feeling of being watched. The couple installed internal cameras, thinking it was just paranoia. And that's when the terror began. At 2:17 a.m. every day, the cameras captured the same pattern: curtains, slowly opening by themselves, and dark figures with stitched eyes watching the couple sleep, always from outside the house. When Gustavo tried to go out one night to confront whoever it was, the front door simply disappeared. In its place, a solid wall with old photos of the couple sleeping, with their eyes scratched out. At the peak of madness, Elisa disappeared. Gustavo searched for her for days, but only found scribbles on the walls. "Open your eyes." He began to tear the wires from the curtains, and with each window opened, a voice whispered, "She doesn't want to see." In the last window, in the attic, there was only a dirty mirror. When he cleaned it, Gustavo saw Elisa behind him, but her eyes were sewn shut with black thread, and she was smiling. Gustavo was found by police a week later, curled up in the attic, with his own eyes sewn shut. The windows, all sealed again. The house is still for sale. Story 8. The Trail of Hanging Skulls. Pedro was a 25-year-old adventurous young man who loved to explore unknown trails. One day, while following an unmarked route in the Serra Catarinense, he came across a hidden trail behind a moss-covered rock. The curious thing was the smell, a stench of raw meat mixed with something denser, like old blood. Still, he entered. The trail was narrow, with strangely aligned trees, all bent towards the path. The more he walked, the louder the silence became. No bird sounds, no wind, nothing. After almost an hour, Pedro saw something hanging from the trees. Skulls. Some human, others animal, all with red ropes. When he tried to turn back, the trail disappeared. Only the trees remained, and the eyes in the skulls. Pedro ran, stumbled, screamed. But soon he began to hear whispers. The trail accepts only those who get lost. He wandered aimlessly for hours until he found a cabin made of bones. Inside, a very old woman with gray skin and milky eyes awaited him. She said he could leave, but first, he would have to return what he saw. Not understanding, Pedro asked what that meant. She handed him a rusty pliers and pointed to his eyes. He refused, cried, begged. But when he tried to escape, he felt the hands of the skulls holding his feet. He screamed until he lost his voice. The next day, a group of climbers found him lying at the entrance of the trail, with his eyes carefully removed, and a note pinned in his pocket. The trail doesn't want to be remembered. Story 9. The Boy in the Dark Closet. In a public elementary school in Pernambuco, the new principal decided to reopen a room that had been locked for over 20 years. It was an old storage room, dark, damp, and with a large wooden closet. When questioned about the room, the school's former janitor simply said, "The boy stayed there, and he is still hungry." Thinking it was just another old superstition, the principal transformed the space into a tutoring room. But as soon as classes began, reports started to flood in. Flickering lights, children vomiting when passing by the door, shadows crawling on the floor, and the closet opening by itself. One of the students, Mateus, only 10 years old, disappeared during recess. The cameras showed him entering the room, staring intently at the closet, and then vanishing. There was no sign of forced entry, nor exit through another room. The principal, desperate, decided to lock the closet with chains. But the next morning, the closet was open again, and with childish drawings inside it. All depicted children, without faces. Upon investigating the school records, they discovered that in the 1970s, a boy named Jonatas had been locked in that closet for 3 days as punishment by a cruel teacher. When they opened it, he was dead, with his face completely scratched, as if he had tried to tear it off with his own nails. Since then, they say he appears to play, but he only takes those who respond. And Matthias responded. The room was sealed. But sometimes those who pass nearby still hear soft knocks and childish giggles. And there, are you still with me? If you made it to the end, you are one of those who face fear head-on. Now, answer me one very sincere question. Which of these stories would you have the courage to live, even if just for a minute? Comment below. It will be insane to see what everyone responds. And look, if this video gave you chills, if it kept you hooked until now, if it moved you, then subscribe to the channel. But come with us for real. This is a place for those who love fear, for those who feel that chill down their spine and still hit play on the next video. The community here is strong, welcoming, and full of people like you. Curious, brave, and with stories to tell. Feel free to comment if you've ever experienced something similar. Share with us. We read everything. Comment, chat, and who knows? Your story might become the next episode here on the channel. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, send it to someone who loves horror, and tell me in the comments what you learned from these stories today. Sometimes, fear is a powerful reminder that there are things that should never be discovered. Let me know if you need anything else.